Chapter 10. Lord Tottenham. Oswald is a boy of firm and unswerving character, and he had never wavered from his first idea. He felt quite certain that the books were right, and that the best way to restore fallen fortunes was to rescue an old man in distress. Then he brings you up as his own son, but if you preferred to go on being your own father's son, I expect the old gentleman would make it up to you some other way. In the books the least thing does it. You put up the railway carriage window, or you pick up his purse when he drops it, or you say a hymn when he suddenly asks you to, and then your fortune is made. The others, as I said, were very slack about it, and did not seem to care much about trying the rescue. They said there wasn't any deadly peril, and we should have to make one before we could rescue the old gentleman from it, but Oswald didn't see that that mattered. However, he thought he would try some of the easier ways first, by himself. So he waited about the station, pulling up railway carriage windows for old gentlemen who looked likely, but nothing happened, and at last the porters said he was a nuisance, so that was no go. No one ever asked him to say a hymn, though he had learned a nice short one, beginning "New every morning," and when an old gentleman did drop a 2-shilling piece just by Ellis's the hairdresser's, and Oswald picked it up and was just thinking what he should say when he returned it, the old gentleman caught him by the collar and called him a young thief. It would have been very unpleasant for Oswald if he hadn't happened to be a very brave boy, and knew the policeman on that beat very well indeed. So the policeman backed him up, and the old gentleman said he was sorry, and offered Oswald 6pence. Oswald refused it with polite disdain, and nothing more happened at all. When Oswald had tried by himself, and it had not come off, he said to the others, "We're wasting our time, not trying to rescue the old gentleman in deadly peril. Come, buck up. Let's do something." It was dinner time, and Pincher was going round getting the bits off the plates. There were plenty, because it was cold mutton day, and Alice said, "It's only fair to try Oswald's way. He has tried all the things the others thought of. Why couldn't we rescue Lord Tottenham?" Lord Tottenham is the old gentleman who walks over the heath every day in a paper collar at 3 o'clock, and when he gets halfway, if there is no one about, he changes his collar and throws the dirty one into the furze bushes. Dicky said, "Lord Tottenham's all right, but where's the deadly peril?" But we couldn't think of any. There are no highwaymen on Blackheath now, I'm sorry to say, and though Oswald said half of us could be highwaymen and the other half rescue party, Dora kept on saying it would be wrong to be a highwayman, so we had to give that up. Then Alice said, "What about Pincher?" We all saw at once that it could be done. Pincher is very well bred, and he does know 1 or 2 things, though we never could teach him to beg, but if you tell him to hold on, he will do it, even if you only say "seize him" in a whisper. So we arranged it all. Dora said she wouldn't play. She said she thought it was wrong, and she knew it was silly, so we left her out, and she went and sat in the dining room with a goody book, so as to be able to say she didn't have anything to do with it if we got into a row over it. Alice and H.O. were to hide in the furze bushes just by where Lord Tottenham changes his collar, and they were to whisper "seize him" to Pincher, and then when Pincher had seized Lord Tottenham, we were to go and rescue him from his deadly peril. And he would say, "How can I reward you, my noble young preservers?" and it would be all right. So we went up to the heath. We were afraid of being late. Oswald told the others what procrastination was, so they got to the furze bushes a little after 2 o'clock, and it was rather cold. Alice and H.O. and Pincher hid, but Pincher did not like it any more than they did, and as we 3 walked up and down we heard him whining, and Alice kept saying, "I am so cold, is he coming yet?" and H.O. wanted to come out and jump about to warm himself, but we told him he must learn to be a Spartan boy, and that he ought to be very thankful he hadn't got a beastly fox eating his inside all the time. H.O. is our little brother, and we are not going to let it be our fault if he grows up a milksop. Besides, it was not really cold. It was his knees. He wears socks. So they stayed where they were, and at last, when even the other 3 who were walking about were beginning to feel rather chilly, we saw Lord Tottenham's big black cloak coming along, flapping in the wind like a great bird. So we said to Alice, "Hist! He approaches. You'll know when to set Pincher on by hearing Lord Tottenham talking to himself. He always does while he's taking off his collar." Then we 3 walked slowly away, whistling to show we were not thinking of anything. Our lips were rather cold, but we managed to do it. Lord Tottenham came striding along, talking to himself. People call him the Mad Protectionist. I don't know what it means, but I don't think people ought to call a lord such names. As he passed us, he said, "Ruin of the country, sir! Fatal error! Fatal error!" And then we looked back and saw he was getting quite near where Pincher was, and Alice and H.O. We walked on so that he shouldn't think we were looking, and in a minute we heard Pincher's bark, and then nothing for a bit. And then we looked round, and sure enough, good old Pincher had got Lord Tottenham by the trouser leg and was holding on like billy-ho, so we started to run. Lord Tottenham had got his collar half off. It was sticking out sideways under his ear, and he was shouting, "Help! Help! Murder!" exactly as if someone had explained to him beforehand what he was to do. Pincher was growling and snarling and holding on. When we got to him I stopped and said, "Dicky, we must rescue this good old man." Lord Tottenham roared in his fury, "Good old man be something or other. Call the dog off." So Oswald said, "It is a dangerous task, but who would hesitate to do an act of true bravery?" And all the while Pincher was worrying and snarling, and Lord Tottenham shouting to us to get the dog away. He was dancing about in the road, with Pincher hanging on like grim death, and his collar flapping about where it was undone. Then Noel said, "Haste, ere yet it be too late." So I said to Lord Tottenham, "Stand still, aged sir, and I will endeavour to alleviate your distress." He stood still, and I stooped down and caught hold of Pincher and whispered, "Drop it, sir, drop it." So then Pincher dropped it, and Lord Tottenham fastened his collar again. He never does change it if there's anyone looking, and he said, "I'm much obliged, I'm sure. Nasty, vicious brute. Here's something to drink my health." But Dicky explained that we are teetotallers, and do not drink people's healths. So Lord Tottenham said, "Well, I'm much obliged, anyway. And now I come to look at you. Of course you're not young ruffians, but gentlemen's sons, eh? Still, you won't be above taking a tip from an old boy. I wasn't when I was your age." And he pulled out half a sovereign. It was very silly, but now we'd done it I felt it would be beastly mean to take the old boy's chink after putting him in such a funk. He didn't say anything about bringing us up as his own sons, so I didn't know what to do. I let Pincher go and was just going to say he was very welcome and we'd rather not have the money, which seemed the best way out of it, when that beastly dog spoiled the whole show. Directly I let him go he began to jump about at us and bark for joy and try to lick our faces. He was so proud of what he'd done. Lord Tottenham opened his eyes and he just said, "The dog seems to know you." And then Oswald saw it was all up and he said, "Good morning," and tried to get away. But Lord Tottenham said, "Not so fast," and he caught Noel by the collar. Noel gave a howl and Alice ran out from the bushes. Noel is her favourite. I'm sure I don't know why. Lord Tottenham looked at her and he said, "So there are more of you?" And then H.O. came out. "Do you complete the party?" Lord Tottenham asked him, and H.O. said there were only 5 of us this time. Lord Tottenham turned sharp off and began to walk away, holding Noel by the collar. We caught up with him and asked him where he was going, and he said, "To the police station." So then I said quite politely, "Well, don't take Noel, he's not strong, and he easily gets upset. Besides, it wasn't his doing. If you want to take anyone, take me. It was my very own idea." Dicky behaved very well. He said, "If you take Oswald, I'll go too, but don't take Noel, he's such a delicate little chap." Lord Tottenham stopped, and he said, "You should have thought of that before." Noel was howling all the time, and his face was very white, and Alice said, "Oh, do let Noel go, dear, good, kind Lord Tottenham. He'll faint if you don't, I know he will, he does sometimes. Oh, I wish we'd never done it. Dora said it was wrong." "Dora displayed considerable common sense," said Lord Tottenham, and he let Noel go. And Alice put her arm around Noel and tried to cheer him up, but he was all trembly and as white as paper. Then Lord Tottenham said, "Will you give me your word of honour not to try to escape?" So we said we would. "Then follow me," he said, and led the way to a bench. We all followed, and Pincher too, with his tail between his legs. He knew something was wrong. Then Lord Tottenham sat down, and he made Oswald and Dicky and H.O. stand in front of him, but he let Alice and Noel sit down, and he said, "You set your dog on me, and you tried to make me believe you were saving me from it. And you would have taken my half-sovereign. Such conduct is most... No, you shall tell me what it is, sir, and speak the truth." So I had to say it was most ungentlemanly, but I said I hadn't been going to take the half-sovereign. "Then what did you do it for?" he asked. "The truth, mind." So I said, "I see now it was very silly, and Dora said it was wrong, but it didn't seem so till we did it. We wanted to restore the fallen fortunes of our house, and in the books, if you rescue an old gentleman from deadly peril, he brings you up as his own son, or if you prefer to be your father's son, he starts you in business, so that you end in wealthy affluence. And there wasn't any deadly peril, so we made Pincher into one. And so..." I was so ashamed I couldn't go on, for it did seem an awfully mean thing. Lord Tottenham said, "A very nice way to make your fortune, by deceit and trickery. I have a horror of dogs. If I'd been a weak man, the shock might have killed me. What do you think of yourselves, eh?" We were all crying except Oswald, and the others say he was. And Lord Tottenham went on, "Well, well, I see you're sorry. Let this be a lesson to you, and we'll say no more about it. I'm an old man now, but I was young once." Then Alice slid along the bench close to him, and put her hand on his arm, her fingers were pink through the holes in her woolly gloves, and said, "I think you're very good to forgive us, and we are really very, very sorry. But we wanted to be like the children in the books, only we never have the chances they have. Everything they do turns out all right. But we are sorry, very, very. And I know Oswald wasn't going to take the half-sovereign. Directly you said that about a tip from an old boy I began to feel bad inside, and I whispered to H.O. that I wished we hadn't." Then Lord Tottenham stood up, and he looked like the death of Nelson, for he is clean-shaved, and it is a good face, and he said, "Always remember never to do a dishonourable thing, for money or for anything else in the world." And we promised we would remember. Then he took off his hat, and we took off ours, and he went away, and we went home. I never felt so cheap in all my life. Dora said, "I told you so," but we didn't mind even that so much, though it was indeed hard to bear. It was what Lord Tottenham had said about ungentlemanly. We didn't go on the Heath for a week after that, but at last we all went, and we waited for him by the bench. When he came along, Alice said, "Please, Lord Tottenham, we have not been on the Heath for a week, to be a punishment because you let us off, but we have brought you a present each if you will take them to show you are willing to make it up." He sat down on the bench, and we gave him our presents. Oswald gave him a sixpenny compass. He bought it with my own money on purpose to give him. Oswald always buys useful presents. The needle would not move after I'd had it a day or two, but Lord Tottenham used to be an admiral, so he will be able to make that go all right. Alice had made him a shaving case with a rose worked on it, and H.O. gave him his knife, the same one he once cut all the buttons off his best suit with. Dicky gave him his prize Naval Heroes, because it was the best thing he had, and Noel gave him a piece of poetry he had made himself. When sin and shame bow down the brow, then people feel just like we do now. We are so sorry with grief and pain. We will never be so ungentlemanly again. Lord Tottenham seemed very pleased. He thanked us and talked to us for a bit, and when he said good-bye he said, "All's fair weather now, mates," and shook hands. And whenever we meet him he nods to us, and if the girls are with us he takes off his hat, so he can't really be going on thinking us ungentlemanly now. One day, when we suddenly found that we had half a crown, we decided that we really ought to try Dicky's way of restoring our fallen fortunes while yet the deed was in our power, because it might easily have happened to us never to have half a crown again. So we decided to dally no longer with being journalists and bandits and things like them, but to send for sample and instructions how to earn £2 a week each in our spare time. We had seen the advertisement in the paper, and we had always wanted to do it, but we had never had the money to spare before somehow. The advertisement says, "Any lady or gentleman can easily earn £2 a week in their spare time. Sample and instructions, 2 shillings. Packed free from observation." A good deal of the half-crown was Dora's. It came from her godmother, but she said she would not mind letting Dicky have it if he would pay her back before Christmas, and if we were sure it was right to try to make our fortune that way. Of course, that was quite easy, because out of £2 a week in your spare time you can easily pay all your debts, and have almost as much left as you began with. And as to the right, we told her to dry up. Dicky had always thought that this was really the best way to restore our fallen fortunes, and we were glad that now he had a chance of trying, because, of course, we wanted the £2 a week each, and besides, we were rather tired of Dicky's always saying, when our ways didn't turn out well, "Why don't you try the sample and instructions about our spare time?" When we found out about our half-crown we got the paper. Noel was playing admirals in it, but he had made the cocked hat without tearing the paper, and we found the advertisement, and it said just the same as ever. So we got a 2-shilling postal order and a stamp, and what was left of the money it was agreed we would spend in ginger beer to drink success to trade. We got some nice paper out of Father's study, and Dicky wrote the letter, and we put in the money and put on the stamp, and made H.O. post it. Then we drank the ginger beer, and then we waited for the sample and instructions. It seemed a long time coming, and the postman got quite tired of us running out and stopping him in the street to ask if it had come. But on the third morning it came. It was quite a large parcel, and it was packed, as the advertisement said it would be, free from observation. That means it was in a box, and inside the box was some stiff browny cardboard, crinkled, like the galvanized iron on the tops of chicken houses, and inside that was a lot of paper, some of it printed and some scrappy, and in the very middle of it all a bottle, not very large, and black, and sealed on the top of the cork with yellow sealing wax. We looked at it as it lay on the nursery table, and while all the others grabbed at the papers to see what the printing said, Oswald went to look for the corkscrew, so as to see what was inside the bottle. He found the corkscrew in the dresser table. It always gets there, though it is supposed to be in the sideboard drawer in the dining room. And when he got back the others had read most of the printed papers. "I don't think it's much good, and I don't think it's quite nice to sell wine," Dora said, "and besides, it's not easy to suddenly begin to sell things when you aren't used to it." "I don't know," said Alice. "I believe I could." They all looked rather down in the mouth, though, and Oswald asked how you were to make your £2 a week. "Why, you've got to get people to taste that stuff in the bottle. It's sherry, Castilian Amoroso its name is, and then you get them to buy it, and then you write to the people and tell them the other people want the wine, and then for every dozen you sell you get 2 shillings from the wine people, so if you sell 20 dozen a week you get your £2. I don't think we shall sell as much as that, said Dicky. We might not the first week, Alice said, but when people found out how nice it was, they would want more and more. And if we only got 10 shillings a week, it would be something to begin with, wouldn't it? Oswald said he should jolly well think it would, and then Dicky took the cork out with the corkscrew. The cork broke a good deal, and some of the bits went into the bottle. Dora got the medicine glass that has the teaspoons and tablespoons marked on it, and we agreed to have a teaspoonful each to see what it was like. No one must have more than that, Dora said, however nice it is. Dora behaved rather as if it were her bottle. I suppose it was, because she had lent the money for it. Then she measured out the teaspoonful, and she had the first go, because of being the eldest. We asked at once what it was like, but Dora could not speak just then. Then she said, "It's like the tonic Noel had in the spring, but perhaps sherry ought to be like that." Then it was Oswald's turn. He thought it was very burny, but he said nothing. He wanted to see first what the others would say. Dicky said his was simply beastly, and Alice said Noel could taste next if he liked. Noel said it was the golden wine of the gods, but he had to put his handkerchief up to his mouth all the same, and I saw the face he made. Then H.O. had his, and he spat it out in the fire, which was very rude and nasty, and we told him so. Then it was Alice's turn. She said, "Only half a teaspoonful for me, Dora. We mustn't use it all up." And she tasted it and said nothing. Then Dicky said, "Look here, I chuck this. I'm not going to hawk round such beastly stuff. Anyone who likes can have the bottle. Quiz?" And Alice got out ego before the rest of us. Then she said, "I know what's the matter with it. It wants sugar." And at once we all saw that that was all there was the matter with the stuff. So we got 2 lumps of sugar and crushed it on the floor with one of the big wooden bricks till it was powdery, and mixed it with some of the wine up to the tablespoon mark, and it was quite different, and not nearly so nasty. "You see, it's all right when you get used to it," Dicky said. I think he was sorry he had said quis in such a hurry. "Of course," Alice said, "it's rather dusty. We must crush the sugar carefully in clean paper before we put it in the bottle." Dora said she was afraid it would be cheating to make one bottle nicer than what people would get when they ordered a dozen bottles, but Alice said Dora always made a fuss about everything, and really it would be quite honest. "You see," she said, "I shall just tell them quite truthfully what we have done to it, and when their dozens come they can do it for themselves." So then we crushed 8 more lumps, very cleanly and carefully between newspapers, and shook it up well in the bottle, and corked it up with a screw of paper, brown and not news, for fear of the poisonous printing ink getting wet and dripping down into the wine and killing people. We made Pincher have a taste, and he sneezed for ever so long, and after that he used to go under the sofa whenever we showed him the bottle. Then we asked Alice who she would try and sell it to. She said, "I shall ask everybody who comes to the house, and while we are doing that we can be thinking of outside people to take it to. We must be careful. There's not much more than half of it left, even counting the sugar." We did not wish to tell Eliza. I don't know why. And she opened the door very quickly that day, so that the taxes, and a man who came to our house by mistake for next door, got away before Alice had a chance to try them with the Castilian Amoroso. But about 5 Eliza slipped out for half an hour to see a friend who was making her a hat for Sunday, and while she was gone there was a knock. Alice went, and we looked over the banisters. When she opened the door she said at once, "Will you walk in, please?" The person at the door said, "I called to see your pa, miss. Is he at home?" Alice said again, "Will you walk in, please?" Then the person, it sounded like a man, said, "He is in, then." But Alice only kept on saying, "Will you walk in, please?" So at last the man did, rubbing his boots very loudly on the mat. Then Alice shut the front door, and we saw that it was the butcher, with an envelope in his hand. He was not dressed in blue, like when he is cutting up the sheep and things in the shop, and he wore knickerbockers. Alice says he came on a bicycle. She led the way into the dining room, where the Castilian Amoroso bottle and the medicine glass were standing on the table all ready. The others stayed on the stairs, but Oswald crept down and looked through the door crack. "Please sit down," said Alice quite calmly, though she told me afterwards I had no idea how silly she felt, and the butcher sat down. Then Alice stood quite still and said nothing, but she fiddled with the medicine glass and put the screw of brown paper straight in the Castilian bottle. "Will you tell your pa I'd like a word with him?" the butcher said, when he got tired of saying nothing. "He'll be in very soon, I think," Alice said. and then she stood still again and said nothing. It was beginning to look very idiotic of her, and H.O. laughed. I went back and cuffed him for it quite quietly, and I don't think the butcher heard. But Alice did, and it roused her from her stupor. She spoke suddenly, very fast indeed, so fast that I knew she had made up what she was going to say before. She had got most of it out of the circular. She said, "I want to call your attention to a sample of sherry wine I have here. It is called Castilian something or other, and at the price it is unequalled for flavour and bouquet." The butcher said, "Well, I never!" And Alice went on, "Would you like to taste it?" "Thank you very much, I'm sure, miss," said the butcher. Alice poured some out. The butcher tasted a very little. He licked his lips, and we thought he was going to say how good it was. But he did not. He put down the medicine glass with nearly all the stuff left in it. We put it back in the bottle afterwards, to save waste, and said, "Excuse me, miss, but isn't it a little sweet? For sherry, I mean." "The real isn't," said Alice. "If you order a dozen it will come quite different to that. We like it best with sugar. I wish you would order some." The butcher asked why. Alice did not speak for a minute, and then she said, "I don't mind telling you. You are in business yourself, aren't you? We are trying to get people to buy it, because we shall have 2 shillings for every dozen we can make anyone buy. It's called a something." "A percentage. Yes, I see," said the butcher, looking at the hole in the carpet. "You see, there are reasons," Alice went on, "why we want to make our fortunes as quickly as we can." "Quite so," said the butcher, and he looked at the place where the paper is coming off the wall. "And this seems a good way," Alice went on. "We paid 2 shillings for the sample and instructions, and it says you can make £2 a week easily in your leisure time." "I'm sure I hope you may, miss," said the butcher, and Alice said again would he buy some. "Sherry is my favourite wine," he said. Alice asked him to have some more to drink. "No, thank you, miss," he said. "It's my favourite wine, but it doesn't agree with me, not the least bit. But I've an uncle drinks it. Suppose I ordered him half a dozen for a Christmas present. Well, miss, here's the shilling commission, anyway," and he pulled out a handful of money and gave her the shilling. "But I thought the wine people paid that," Alice said. But the butcher said not on half dozens they didn't. Then he said he didn't think he'd wait any longer for Father, but would Alice ask Father to write him. Alice offered him the sherry again, but he said something about not for worlds, and then she let him out, and came back to us with the shilling and said, "How's that?" And we said, A1. And all the evening we talked of our fortune that we had begun to make. Nobody came next day, but the day after a lady came to ask for money to build an orphanage for the children of dead sailors, and we saw her. I went in with Alice, and when we had explained to her that we had only a shilling and we wanted it for something else, Alice suddenly said, "Would you like some wine?" And the lady said, "Thank you very much," but she looked surprised. She was not a young lady, and she had a mantle with beads, and the beads had come off in places, leaving a browny braid showing, and she had printed papers about the dead sailors in a sealskin bag, and the seal had come off in places, leaving the skin bare. We gave her a tablespoonful of the wine in a proper wine glass out of the sideboard, because she was a lady. And when she had tasted it she got up in a very great hurry and shook out her dress and snapped her bag shut and said, "You naughty, wicked children, what do you mean by playing a trick like this? You ought to be ashamed of yourselves. I shall write to your mamma about it. You dreadful little girl, you might have poisoned me. But your mamma..." Then Alice said, "I'm very sorry. The butcher liked it, only he said it was sweet. And please don't write to Mother. It makes Father so unhappy when letters come for her." And Alice was very near crying. "What do you mean, you silly child?" said the lady, looking quite bright and interested. "Why doesn't your father like your mother to have letters, eh?" And Alice said, "Oh, you..." and began to cry and bolted out of the room. Then I said, "Our mother is dead, and will you please go away now?" The lady looked at me a minute, and then she looked quite different, and she said, "I'm very sorry. I didn't know. Never mind about the wine. I dare say your little sister meant it kindly." And then she looked round the room just like the butcher had done. Then she said again, "I didn't know. I'm very sorry." So I said, "Don't mention it," and shook hands with her and let her out. Of course we couldn't have asked her to buy the wine after what she'd said, but I think she was not a bad sort of person. I do like a person to say they're sorry when they ought to be, especially a grown-up. They do it so seldom. I suppose that's why we think so much of it. But Alice and I didn't feel jolly for ever so long afterwards, and when I went back into the dining room I saw how different it was from when Mother was here, and we are different, and Father is different, and nothing is like it was. I am glad I am not made to think about it every day. I went and found Alice and told her what the lady had said. and when she had finished crying we put away the bottle and said we would not try to sell any more to people who came. And we did not tell the others. We only said the lady did not buy any. But we went up on the heath, and some soldiers went by, and there was a Punch and Judy show, and when we came back we were better. The bottle got quite dusty where we had put it, and perhaps the dust of ages would have laid thick and heavy on it, only a clergyman called when we were all out. He was not our own clergyman. Mr. Bristow is our own clergyman, and we all love him, and we would not try to sell sherry to people we like, and make £2 a week out of them in our spare time. It was another clergyman, just a stray one, and he asked Eliza if the dear children would not like to come to his little Sunday school. We always spend Sunday afternoons with Father, but as he had left the name of his vicarage with Eliza, and asked her to tell us to come, we thought we would go and call on him just to explain about Sunday afternoons, and we thought we might as well take the sherry with us. "I won't go unless you all go too," Alice said, "and I won't do the talking." Dora said she thought we had much better not go, but we said rot, and it ended up in her coming with us, and I am glad she did. Oswald said he would do the talking if the others liked, and he learned up what to say from the printed papers. We went to the vicarage early on Saturday afternoon, and rang at the bell. It is a new red house with no trees in the garden, only very yellow mould and gravel. It was all very neat and dry. Just before we rang the bell we heard someone inside call, "Jane! Jane!" and we thought we would not be Jane for anything. It was the sound of the voice that called that made us sorry for her. The door was opened by a very neat servant in black, with a white apron. We saw her tying the strings as she came along the hall, through the different coloured glass in the door. Her face was red, and I think she was Jane. We asked if we could see Mr. Mallow. The servant said Mr. Mallow was very busy with his sermon just then, but she would see. But Oswald said, "It's all right, he asked us to come." So she let us all in, and shut the front door, and showed us into a very tidy room with a bookcase full of a lot of books covered in black cotton with white labels, and some dull pictures and a harmonium. And Mr. Mallow was writing at a desk with drawers, copying something out of a book. He was stout and short, and wore spectacles. He covered his writing up when we went in. I don't know why. He looked rather cross, and we heard Jane or somebody being scolded outside by the voice. I hope it wasn't for letting us in, but I have had doubts. "Well," said the clergyman, "what is all this about?" "You asked us to call," Dora said, "about your little Sunday school. We are the Bastables of Lewisham Road." "Oh, yes," he said. "And shall I expect you all tomorrow?" He took up his pen and fiddled with it, and he did not ask us to sit down, but some of us did. "We always spend Sunday afternoon with Father," said Dora, "but we wish to thank you for being so kind as to ask us." "And we wish to ask you something else," said Oswald, and he made a sign to Alice to get the sherry ready in the glass. She did, behind Oswald's back, while he was speaking. "My time is limited," said Mr. Mallow, looking at his watch, "but still..." Then he muttered something about the fold, and went on. "Tell me what is troubling you, my little man, and I will try to give you any help in my power. What is it you want?" Then Oswald quickly took the glass from Alice and held it out to him, and said, "I want your opinion on that." "On that?" he said. "What is it?" "It is a shipment," Oswald said, "but it's quite enough for you to taste." Alice had filled the glass half full. I suppose she was too excited to measure properly. "A shipment?" said the clergyman, taking the glass in his hand. "Yes," Oswald went on, "an exceptional opportunity. Full-bodied and nutty." "It really does taste rather like one kind of Brazil nut." Alice put her oar in as usual. The vicar looked from Alice to Oswald and back again, and Oswald went on with what he had learnt from the printing. The clergyman held the glass at half arm's length, stiffly, as if he had caught cold. "It is of a quality never before offered at the price. Old, delicate what's his name?" "Amorolio," said H.O. "Amoroso," said Oswald. "H.O., you just shut up. Castilian Amoroso. It's a true after-dinner wine, stimulating and yet..." "Wine?" said Mr. Mallow, holding the glass further off. "Do you know," he went on, making his voice very thick and strong, I expect he does it like that in church, "have you never been taught that it is the drinking of wine and spirits, yes, and beer, which makes half the homes in England full of wretched little children and degraded, miserable parents?" "Not if you put sugar in it," said Alice firmly. 8 lumps and shake the bottle. We have each had more than a teaspoonful of it, and we were not ill at all. It was something else that upset H.O. Most likely all those acorns he got out of the park." the clergyman seemed to be speechless with conflicting emotions, and just then the door opened and the lady came in. She had a white cap with lace and an ugly violet flower in it, and she was tall and looked very strong, though thin. I do believe she had been listening at the door. "But why," the vicar was saying, "why did you bring this dreadful fluid, this curse of our country, to me to taste?" "Because we thought you might buy some," said Dora, who never sees when a game is up. "In books the parson loves his bottle of old port, and new sherry is just as good, with sugar, for people who like sherry. And if you would order a dozen of the wine, then we should get 2 shillings. The lady said, and it was the voice, "Good gracious! Nasty, sordid little things! Haven't they anyone to teach them better?" And Dora got up and said, "No, we are not those things you say, but we are sorry we came here to be called names. We want to make our fortune just as much as Mr Mallow does, only no one would listen to us if we preached, so it's no use our copying out sermons like him." And I think that was smart of Dora, even if it was rather rude. Then I said perhaps we had better go, and the lady said, "I should think so." But when we were going to wrap up the bottle and glass, the clergyman said, "No, you can leave that," and we were so upset we did, though it wasn't his after all. We walked home very fast and not saying much, and the girls went up to their rooms. When I went to tell them tea was ready, and there was a tea cake, Dora was crying like anything, and Alice hugging her. I am afraid there is a great deal of crying in this chapter, but I can't help it. Girls will sometimes. I suppose it is their nature, and we ought to be sorry for their affliction. "It's no good," Dora was saying. "You all hate me, and you think I'm a prig and a busybody, but I do try to do right, oh, I do. Oswald, go away. Don't come here making fun of me." So I said, "I'm not making fun, Sissy. Don't cry, old girl." Mother taught me to call her Sissy when we were very little, and before the others came, but I don't often somehow, now we were old. I patted her on the back, and she put her head against my sleeve, holding on to Alice all the time, and she went on. She was in that laughy, cryy state when people say things they wouldn't say at other times. Oh dear, I do try, I do. And when Mother died, she said, 'Dora, take care of the others and teach them to be good, and keep them out of trouble and make them happy.' She said, 'Take care of them for me, Dora dear.' And I have tried, and all of you hate me for it, and today I let you do this, though I knew all the time it was silly." I hope you will not think I was a muff, but I kissed Dora for some time, because girls like it, and I will never say again that she comes the good elder sister too much. And I've put all this in, though I do hate telling about it, because I own I have been hard on Dora, but I never will be again. She's a good old sort. Of course we never knew before about what Mother told her, or we wouldn't have ragged her as we did. We did not tell the little ones, but I got Alice to speak to Dicky, and we 3 can sit on the others, if requisite. This made us forget all about the sherry, but about 8 o'clock there was a knock, and Eliza went, and we saw it was poor Jane, if her name was Jane, from the vicarage. She handed in a brown paper parcel and a letter, and 3 minutes later Father called us into his study. On the table was the brown paper parcel, open, with our bottle and glass on it, and Father had a letter in his hand. He pointed to the bottle and sighed, and said, "What have you been doing now?" The letter in his hand was covered with little black writing all over the 4 large pages. So Dicky spoke up, and he told Father the whole thing, as far as he knew it, for Alice and I had not told about the dead sailor's lady. And when he had done, Alice said, "Has Mr Mallow written to you to say he will buy a dozen of the sherry after all? It is really not half bad with sugar in it." Father said no, he didn't think clergymen could afford such expensive wine, and he said he would like to taste it. So we gave him what there was left, for we had decided coming home we would give up trying for the £2 a week in our spare time. Father tasted it, and then he acted just as H.O. had done when he had his teaspoonful, but of course we did not say anything. Then he laughed till I thought he would never stop. I think it was the sherry, because I am sure I have read somewhere about wine that maketh glad the heart of man. He had only a very little, which shows that it was a good after-dinner wine, stimulating, and yet I forget the rest. But when he had done laughing he said, "It's all right, kids, only don't do it again. The wine trade is overcrowded, and besides, I thought you promised to consult me before going into business." "Before buying one, I thought you meant," said Dicky. This was only on commission. And Father laughed again. I am glad we got the Castilian Amoroso, because it did really cheer Father up, and you cannot always do that, however hard you try, even if you make jokes or give him a comic paper. The part about his nobleness only comes at the end, but you would not understand it unless you knew how it began. It began, like nearly everything about that time, with treasure-seeking. Of course, as soon as we had promised to consult my father about business matters, we all gave up wanting to go into business. I don't know how it is, but having to consult about a thing with grown-up people, even the bravest and the best, seems to make the thing not worth doing afterwards. We don't mind Albert's uncle chipping in sometimes when the thing's going on, but we are glad he never asked us to promise to consult him about anything. Yet Oswald saw that my father was quite right, and I dare say if we had had that £100 we should have spent it on the share in that lucrative business for the sale of useful patent, and then found out afterwards that we should have done better to spend the money in some other way. My father says so, and he ought to know. We had several ideas about that time, but having so little chink always stood in the way. This was the case with H.O.'s idea of setting up a coconut shy on this side of the heath, where there are none generally. We had no sticks or wooden balls, and the greengrocer said he could not book so many as 12 dozen coconuts without Mr. Bastable's written order, and as we did not wish to consult my father, it was decided to drop it. And when Alice dressed up Pincher in some of the doll's clothes, and we made up our minds to take him round with an organ as soon as we had taught him to dance, we were stopped at once by Dicky's remembering how he had once heard that an organ cost £700. Of course, this was the big church kind, but even the ones on 3 legs can't be got for 1 7pence, which was all we had when we first thought of it, so we gave that up too. It was a wet day, I remember, and mutton hash for dinner, very tough, with pale gravy with lumps in it. I think the others would have left a good deal on the sides of their plates, although they know better, only Oswald said it was a savoury stew made of the red deer that Edward shot. So then we were the children of the New Forest, and the mutton tasted much better. No one in the New Forest minds venison being tough, and the gravy pale. Then, after dinner, we let the girls have a dolls' tea party, on condition they didn't expect us boys to wash up, and it was when we were drinking the last of the licorice water out of the little cups that Dicky said, "This reminds me." So we said, "What of?" Dicky answered us at once, though his mouth was full of bread with licorice stuck in it to look like cake. You should not speak with your mouth full, even to your own relations, and you shouldn't wipe your mouth on the back of your hand, but on your handkerchief, if you have one. Dicky did not do this. He said, "Why, you remember when we first began about treasure-seeking, I said I had thought of something, only I could not tell you because I hadn't finished thinking about it?" We said yes. "Well, this licorice water—" "Tea," said Alice softly. "Well, tea, then, made me think." He was going on to say what it made him think, but Noel interrupted and cried out, "I say, let's finish this old tea party and have a council of war." So we got out the flags and the wooden sword and the drum, and Oswald beat it while the girls washed up, till Eliza came up to say she had the jumping toothache and the noise went through her like a knife. So of course Oswald left off at once. When you are polite to Oswald, he never refuses to grant your requests. When we were all dressed up, we sat down round the campfire, and Dicky began again. Everyone in the world wants money. Some people get it. The people who get it are the ones who see things. I have seen one thing. Dicky stopped and smoked the pipe of peace. It is the pipe we did bubbles with in the summer, and somehow it has not got broken yet. We put tea leaves in it for the pipe of peace, but the girls are not allowed to have any. It is not right to let girls smoke. They get to think too much of themselves if you let them do everything the same as men. Oswald said, "Out with it." "I see that glass bottles only cost a penny. H.O., if you dare to snigger, I'll send you round selling old bottles, and you shan't have any sweets except out of the money you get for them. And the same with you, Noel." "Noel wasn't sniggering," said Alice in a hurry. "It is only his taking so much interest in what you are saying that makes him look like that. Be quiet, H.O., and don't you make faces either. Do go on, Dicky dear." So Dicky went on. "There must be hundreds of millions of bottles of medicines sold every year, because all the different medicines say thousands of cures daily, and if you only take that as 2,000, which it must be at least, it mounts up. And the people who sell them must make a great deal of money by them, because they are nearly always 2 and 9pence the bottle, and 3 and 6 for one nearly double the size. Now the bottles, as I was saying, don't cost anything like that." "It's the medicine costs the money," said Dora. "Look how expensive jujubes are at the chemist's, and peppermints too." "That's only because they're nice," Dicky explained. "Nasty things are not so dear." Look what a lot of brimstone you get for a penny, and the same with alum. We would not put the nice kinds of chemists' things in our medicine. Then he went on to tell us that when we had invented our medicine we would write and tell the editor about it, and he would put it in the paper, and then people would send their 2 and 9pence and 3 and 6 for the bottle nearly double the size, and then when the medicine had cured them they would write to the paper and their letters would be printed, saying how they had been suffering for years and never thought to get about again, but thanks to the blessing of our ointment. Dora interrupted and said, "Not ointment, it's so messy." And Alice thought so too, and Dicky said he did not mean it, he was quite decided to let it be in bottles. So now it was all settled, and we did not see at the time that this would be a sort of going into business, but afterwards when Albert's uncle showed us we saw it, and we were sorry. We only had to invent the medicine. You might think that was easy, because of the number of them you see every day in the paper, but it is much harder than you think. First we had to decide what sort of illness we should like to cure, and a heated discussion ensued, like in Parliament. Dora wanted it to be something to make the complexion of dazzling fairness, but we remembered how her face came all red and rough when she used the Rosabella soap that was advertised to make the darkest complexion fair as the lily, and she agreed that perhaps it was better not. Noel wanted to make the medicine first and then find out what it would cure, but Dicky thought not, because there are so many more medicines than there are things the matter with us, so it would be easier to choose the disease first. Oswald would have liked wounds. I still think it was a good idea, but Dicky said, "Who has wounds, especially now there aren't any wars? We shouldn't sell a bottle a day." So Oswald gave in, because he knows what manners are, and it was Dicky's idea. H.O. wanted a cure for the uncomfortable feeling that they give you powders for, but we explained to him that grown-up people do not have this feeling, however much they eat, and he agreed. Dicky said he did not care a straw what the loathsome disease was, as long as we hurried up and settled on something. Then Alice said, "It ought to be something very common, and only one thing, not the pains in the back and all the hundreds of things that people have in somebody's syrup. What's the commonest thing of all?" And at once we said, "Colds." So that was settled. Then we wrote a label to go on the bottle. When it was written it would not go on the vinegar bottle that we had got, but we knew it would go small when it was printed. It was like this: Bastable's certain cure for colds, coughs, asthma, shortness of breath, and all infections of the chest. 1 dose gives immediate relief. It will cure your cold in 1 bottle, especially the larger size, at 3 shillings 6pence. Order at once of the makers to prevent disappointment. Makers: D-O-R-A-N and H-O Bastable, 150 Lewisham Road, S.E. A halfpenny for all bottles returned. Of course the next thing was for one of us to catch a cold and try what cured it. We all wanted to be the one, but it was Dicky's idea, and he said he was not going to be done out of it, so we let him. It was only fair. He left off his undershirt that very day, and next morning he stood in a draught in his nightgown for quite a long time, and we damped his day shirt with a nail brush before he put it on, but all was vain. They always tell you that these things will give you cold, but we found it was not so. So then we all went over to the park, and Dicky went right into the water with his boots on, and stood there as long as he could bear it, for it was rather cold, and we stood and cheered him on. He walked home in his wet clothes, which they say is a sure thing, but it was no go, though his boots were quite spoiled. And 3 days after, Noel began to cough and sneeze. So then Dicky said it was not fair. "I can't help it," Noel said. "You should have caught it yourself, then it wouldn't have come to me." And Alice said she had known all along Noel oughtn't to have stood about on the bank cheering in the cold. Noel had to go to bed, and then we began to make the medicines. We were sorry he was out of it, but he had the fun of taking the things. We made a great many medicines. Alice made herb tea. She got sage and thyme and savory and marjoram, and boiled them all up together with salt and water, but she would put parsley in too. Oswald is sure parsley is not a herb. It is only put on the cold meat, and you are not supposed to eat it. It kills parrots to eat parsley, I believe. I expect it was the parsley that disagreed so with Noel. The medicine did not seem to do the cough any good. Oswald got a pennyworth of alum, because it is so cheap, and some turpentine, which everyone knows is good for colds, and a little sugar and an aniseed ball. These were mixed in a bottle with water, but Eliza threw it away and said it was nasty rubbish, and I hadn't any money to get more things with. Dora made him some gruel, and he said it did his chest good, but of course that was no use, because you cannot put gruel in bottles and say it is medicine. It would not be honest, and besides nobody would believe you. Dick mixed up lemon juice and sugar, and a little of the juice of the red flannel that Noel's throat was done up in. It comes out beautifully in hot water. Noel took this and he liked it. Noel's own idea was licorice water, and we let him have it, but it is too plain and black to sell in bottles at the proper price. Noel liked H.O.'s medicine the best, which was silly of him, because it was only peppermints melted in hot water, and a little cobalt to make it look blue. It was all right, because H.O.'s paint box is the French kind, with couleur non venineuse on it. This means you may suck your brushes if you want to, or even your paints if you are a very little boy. It was rather jolly while Noel had that cold. He had a fire in his bedroom, which opens out of Dicky's and Oswald's, and the girls used to read aloud to Noel all day. They will not read aloud to you when you are well. Father was away at Liverpool on business, and Albert's uncle was at Hastings. We were rather glad of this, because we wished to give all the medicines a fair trial, and grown-ups are but too fond of interfering. As if we should have given him anything poisonous. His cold went on. It was bad in his head, but it was not one of the kind when he has to have poultices and can't sit up in bed. But when it had been in his head nearly a week, Oswald happened to tumble over Alice on the stairs. When we got up she was crying. "Don't cry, silly," said Oswald. "You know I didn't hurt you. I was very sorry if I had hurt her, but you ought not to sit on the stairs in the dark and let other people tumble over you. You ought to remember how beastly it is for them if they do hurt you." "Oh, it's not that, Oswald," Alice said. "Don't be a pig. I'm so miserable. Do be kind to me." So Oswald thumped her on the back and told her to shut up. "It's about Noel," she said. "I'm sure he's very ill, and playing about with medicines is all very well, but I know he's ill, and Eliza won't send for the doctor. She says it's only a cold. And I know the doctor's bills are awful. I heard Father telling Aunt Emily so in the summer. But he is ill, and perhaps he'll die or something." Then she began to cry again. Oswald thumped her again, because he knows how a good brother ought to behave, and said, "Cheer up." If we had been in a book, Oswald would have embraced his little sister tenderly, and mingled his tears with hers. Then Oswald said, "Why not write to Father?" And she cried more, and said, "I've lost the paper with the address. H.O. had it to draw on the back of, and I can't find it now. I've looked everywhere. I'll tell you what I'm going to do." "No, I won't. But I'm going out. Don't tell the others. And I say, Oswald, do pretend I'm in if Eliza asks. Promise." "Tell me what you're going to do," I said. But she said no. And there was a good reason why not. So I said I wouldn't promise if it came to that. Of course I meant to all right, but it did seem mean of her not to tell me. So Alice went out by the side door while Eliza was setting tea, and she was a long time gone. She was not in to tea. When Eliza asked Oswald where she was, he said he did not know, but perhaps she was tidying her corner drawer. Girls often do this, and it takes a long time. Noel coughed a good bit after tea, and asked for Alice. Oswald told him she was doing something, and it was a secret. Oswald did not tell any lies, even to save his sister. When Alice came back she was very quiet, but she whispered to Oswald that it was all right. When it was rather late, Eliza said she was going out to post a letter. This always takes her an hour, because she will go to the post office across the heath instead of the pillar box, because once a boy dropped fusees in our pillar box and burnt the letters. It was not any of us. Eliza told us about it. And when there was a knock at the door a long time after, we thought it was Eliza come back, and that she had forgotten the back door key. We made H.O. go down to open the door, because it is his place to run about. His legs are younger than ours. And we heard boots on the stairs besides H.O.'s, and we listened spellbound till the door opened, and it was Albert's uncle. He looked very tired. "I'm glad you've come," Oswald said. "Alice began to think Noel—" Alice stopped me, and her face was very red. Her nose was shiny too, with having cried so much before tea. She said, "I only said I thought Noel ought to have the doctor. Don't you think he ought?" She got hold of Albert's uncle and held on to him. "Let's have a look at you, young man," said Albert's uncle, and he sat down on the edge of the bed. It is a rather shaky bed. The bar that keeps it steady underneath got broken when we were playing burglars last winter. It was our crowbar. He began to feel Noel's pulse, and went on talking. It was revealed to the Arab physician, as he made merry in his tents on the wild plains of Hastings, that the Presence had a cold in its head. So he immediately seated himself on the magic carpet, and bade it bear him hither, only pausing in the flight to purchase a few sweetmeats in the bazaar. He pulled out a jolly lot of chocolate and some butterscotch and grapes for Noel. When we had all said thank you, he went on. "The physicians are the words of wisdom. It's high time this kid was asleep. I have spoken. You have my leave to depart." So we bunked, and Dora and Albert's uncle made Noel comfortable for the night. When they came to the nursery, which we had gone down to, he sat down in the Guy Fawkes chair and said, "Now then." Alice said, "You may tell them what I did. I dare say they'll all be in a wax, but I don't care." "I think you were very wise," said Albert's uncle, pulling her close to him to sit on his knee. "I am very glad you telegraphed. So then Oswald understood what Alice's secret was. She had gone out and sent a telegram to Albert's uncle at Hastings. But Oswald thought she might have told him. Afterwards she told me what she had put in the telegram. It was, "Come home. We have given Noel a cold, and I think we are killing him." With the address it came to 10 pence halfpenny. Then Albert's uncle began to ask questions, and it all came out, how Dicky had tried to catch the cold, but the cold had gone to Noel instead, and about the medicines and all. Albert's uncle looked very serious. "Look here," he said, "you're old enough not to play the fool like this. Health is the best thing you've got. You ought to know better than to risk it. You might have killed your little brother with your precious medicines. You've had a lucky escape, certainly. But poor Noel." "Oh, do you think he's going to die?" Alice asked that, and she was crying again. "No, no," said Albert's uncle, "but look here. Do you see how silly you've been? And I thought you promised your father—" And then he gave us a long talking to. He can make you feel most awfully small. At last he stopped, and we said we were very sorry, and he said, "You know I promised to take you all to the pantomime?" So we said yes, and knew but too well that now he wasn't going to. Then he went on, "Well, I will take you if you like, or I will take Noel to the sea for a week to cure his cold. Which is it to be?" Of course he knew we should say take Noel, and we did, but Dicky told me afterwards he thought it was hard on H.O. Albert's uncle stayed till Eliza came in, and then he said good night in a way that showed us that all was forgiven and forgotten. And we went to bed. It must have been the middle of the night when Oswald woke up suddenly, and there was Alice with her teeth chattering, shaking him to wake him. "Oh, Oswald," she said, "I'm so unhappy. Suppose I should die in the night." Oswald told her to go to bed and not gas. But she said, "I must tell you. I wish I'd told Albert's uncle. I'm a thief, and if I die tonight I know where thieves go to." So Oswald saw it was no good, and he sat up in bed and said, "Go ahead." So Alice stood shivering and said, "I hadn't enough money for the telegram, so I took the bad sixpence out of the exchequer, and I paid for it with that and the 5 pence I had. And I wouldn't tell you, because if you'd stopped me doing it I couldn't have borne it. And if you'd helped me you'd have been a thief too. Oh, what shall I do?" Oswald thought a minute, and then he said, "You'd better have told me. But I think it will be all right if we pay it back. Go to bed. Cross with you? No, stupid. Only another time you'd better not keep secrets." So she kissed Oswald, and he let her, and she went back to bed. The next day Albert's uncle took Noel away before Oswald had time to persuade Alice that we ought to tell him about the 6 pence. Alice was very unhappy, but not so much as in the night. You can be very miserable in the night if you have done anything wrong and you happen to be awake. I know this for a fact. None of us had any money except Eliza, and she wouldn't give us any unless we said what for, and of course we could not do that because of the honour of the family. And Oswald was anxious to get the 6 pence to give to the telegraph people, because he feared that the badness of that 6 pence might have been found out, and that the police might come for Alice at any moment. I don't think I ever had such an unhappy day. Of course we could have written to Albert's uncle, but it would have taken a long time, and every moment of delay added to Alice's danger. We thought and thought, but we couldn't think of any way to get that 6 pence. It seems a small sum, but you see Alice's liberty depended on it. It was quite late in the afternoon when I met Mrs. Leslie on the parade. She had a brown fur coat and a lot of yellow flowers in her hands. She stopped to speak to me and asked me how the poet was. I told her he had a cold, and I wondered whether she would lend me 6 pence if I asked her, but I could not make up my mind how to begin to say it. It is a hard thing to say, much harder than you would think. She talked to me for a bit, and then she suddenly got into a cab and said, "I'd no idea it was so late," and told the man where to go. And just as she started she shoved the yellow flowers through the window and said, "For the sick poet, with my love," and was driven off. Gentle reader, I will not conceal from you what Oswald did. He knew all about not disgracing the family, and he did not like doing what I am going to say. And they were really Noel's flowers, only he could not have sent them to Hastings, and Oswald knew he would say yes if Oswald asked him. Oswald sacrificed his family pride because of his little sister's danger. I do not say he was a noble boy, I just tell you what he did, and you can decide for yourself about the nobleness. He put on his oldest clothes. They're much older than any you would think he had if you saw him when he was tidy, and he took those yellow chrysanthemums, and he walked with them to Greenwich Station, and waited for the trains bringing people from London. He sold those flowers in penny bunches and got 10 pence. Then he went to the telegraph office at Lewisham and said to the lady there, "A little girl gave you a bad 6 pence yesterday. Here are 6 good pennies." The lady said she had not noticed it, and never mind, but Oswald knew that honesty is the best policy, and he refused to take back the pennies. So at last she said she would put them in the plate on Sunday. She's a very nice lady. I like the way she does her hair. Then Oswald went home to Alice and told her, and she hugged him, and said he was a dear, good, kind boy, and he said, "Oh, it's all right." We bought peppermint bullseyes with the fourpence I had over, and the others wanted to know where we got the money, but we would not tell. Only afterwards, when Noel came home, we told him, because they were his flowers, and he said it was quite right. He made some poetry about it. I only remember one bit of it. "The noble youth of high degree consents to play a menial part, all for his sister Alice's sake, who was so dear to his faithful heart." But Oswald himself has never bragged about it. We got no treasure out of this, unless you count the peppermint bullseyes.